She didn't even look at Mara when she did it. That was the part nobody talked about afterward. Not the crash of the display case, not the scattered silk scarves fanning across the marble floor like spilled blood. What nobody mentioned was that the woman in the white fur coat never once made eye contact. She simply turned, let her elbow catch the edge of the display stand, and watched it fall the way you'd watch a leaf drop from a tree. Casual, expected, beneath comment. Then she looked down at Mara, 7 months pregnant, yellow cleaning uniform, knees already aching, and said, "Well, that's what you're here for." 50 people stood in that boutique. Not one of them moved. If you were in Mara's position, 7 months along, back screaming, strangers watching you like you were part of the furniture, what would you have done? Before we go any further, if stories like this one move you, if you believe some people deserve a second chapter, that actually makes sense. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell. I promise you, this is only the beginning of what Mara and Dante's story becomes. And when you're done watching, drop a comment and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the moment everything changed. The morning had not started badly, which was the cruel joke of it. Mara Ellison had learned, somewhere between her 28th and 29th year on this earth, that the worst days never announced themselves. They didn't come in with thunder. They arrived looking like ordinary Tuesdays, and by the time you realized what was happening, you were already on your knees. She had gotten to the Caldwell Center, one of those luxury shopping complexes downtown that smelled of money and fresh flower arrangements, at 6:45 that morning, same as always. She'd packed her lunch the night before. Peanut butter on whole wheat, a banana that was slightly too ripe but still fine, a bottle of water she'd refilled from the tap at home, because bottled water was $3 at the vending machine, and $3 was $3. She had signed in at the service entrance, pulled on her uniform, the yellow one, not her favorite, because her favorite was in the wash, and started her first floor sweep before most of the boutiques had even opened their doors. She was good at her job. That wasn't pride talking, it was fact. She moved efficiently, she never left streaks on the glass cases, and she had a system for the marble flooring near the east entrance that her supervisor had once called, without irony, almost artistic. Mara had smiled at that, because what else do you do when a compliment about mopping a floor is the best thing someone says to you all week? The baby kicked once around 8 in the morning, a strong, purposeful push against her right side that made her stop walking and press her palm flat against her belly through the uniform fabric. She stood there in the middle of the east corridor for about 4 seconds, just feeling that, and something in her chest opened up like a window. "I know," she said quietly, to no one, to the baby. "We're almost done with this part." She didn't know what she meant by this part. She wasn't sure there was a different part waiting for her, but it felt important to say. By 10:15, most of the boutiques had filled with the kind of customers who shopped on weekday mornings. People who did not need to be anywhere else. People whose shoes cost more than Mara's monthly grocery bill. People who moved through the world as though inconvenience was something that happened to other people. Mara had stopped resenting them somewhere around her 5th month working at the Caldwell Center. Resentment was exhausting, and she was already exhausted enough without adding more weight to it. She was near the entrance to a boutique called Ilara, fine scarves, silk blouses, the kind of accessories that served no practical purpose but photographed beautifully, when she heard the heels first. A particular kind of heel click, quick and deliberate, the sound of a woman who expected rooms to rearrange themselves around her arrival. Mara stepped to the side automatically. She had learned to do that. The woman who entered was probably 40, though she'd spent real money trying to look 32, white fur coat despite it being a perfectly mild October morning. Hair so flawlessly blown out it looked architectural. 2 women behind her who were clearly assistants rather than friends, because friends would have been talking, and these women were silent, carrying bags, watching their employer with the careful attention of people who'd learned that the moment they stopped paying attention was the moment something went wrong. The woman, Mara would never learn her name, which was probably fine, swept through the boutique entrance and stopped near a long display stand that held a collection of limited edition silk scarves, each one laid out with the precision of a museum exhibit. She picked one up, rubbed it between 2 fingers, and made a sound in her throat that communicated everything she thought of it without requiring actual words. Mara was 6 feet away. Close enough to hear, close enough to be seen clearly, if the woman had bothered to look. She didn't look. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. The woman set the scarf down, not on the stand but sort of near it, the edge hanging off the counter. Then she reached into her bag for her phone, and as she pulled it out, her elbow caught the near corner of the display stand with a movement that was, Mara would think later, just slightly too deliberate to be completely accidental. The stand went over. 40-plus scarves, silk, each probably worth more than $300, cascaded across the marble floor in a waterfall of color. Jewel blue, deep amber, ivory, forest green. Beautiful, honestly, in the way destruction sometimes is. The woman looked down at the mess. Then she looked at Mara, for the first time. "Well," she said, "that's what you're here for." The words hit like a flat hand, not because they were the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to Mara. They weren't, not even close, but because of how they were delivered. No heat in them, no actual contempt, just the absolute certainty that Mara was furniture, a function, something the building provided like lighting or air conditioning, and that furniture didn't need to be spoken to with any particular care. The boutique had maybe 35 people in it. A few more in the corridor outside had paused, watching through the glass. Mara could feel the eyes like physical weight. She could see, in her peripheral vision, a salesgirl near the back wall who had opened her mouth and then closed it again without speaking. Nobody moved. Mara stood there for one breath. 2. The baby was quiet now, still, as though even the child understood that this was a moment requiring stillness. Then she bent forward to reach for the cart where she kept her supplies, and the movement sent a sharp pull through her lower back, that particular pregnancy ache that lived just above her tailbone and woke her up most nights. She pulled out a folded cloth and crouched down, slowly, carefully, the way you move when your center of gravity belongs to someone else, and began picking up the scarves. The marble was cold under her knees. She hadn't planned to kneel. Her back couldn't take standing and bending repeatedly, and the scarves were spread across too wide an area to gather any other way, and she just went to her knees. It was practical. It was necessary. It was also, she knew, the image that would live in the minds of everyone watching, the pregnant woman in the yellow uniform on her knees on the floor, while the woman in the white coat stood above her checking her phone. She refused to cry. She was very clear with herself about that. She had cried in this building before, in the utility closet near the service elevator, alone, where nobody could hear. And she had rules about crying in front of people. The rule was, don't. Not because it was weak, because crying in front of people who don't care about you just gives them something to feel superior about, and she wasn't going to give this woman in the white coat anything. She gathered one scarf, then another. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that, oddly. Her hands were completely steady. She didn't hear the door. She didn't hear the shift in the room, the specific kind of silence that's different from the quiet that was already there. Thicker, more cautious, with a particular held breath quality that comes when everyone in a space suddenly becomes aware of someone who has just entered it. She didn't notice any of that because she was staring at the floor, counting scarves, keeping her hands moving. What she noticed was the shadow. Someone had crouched down beside her, on the floor, on the marble. A man in a suit. She could tell from the fabric that grazed the floor next to her knees, charcoal gray, expensive. And he was picking up scarves. Just picking them up. Quietly. Without saying anything. The way you help someone carry something heavy without making a production of it. Her first thought was that it was a store employee, finally, someone who'd gotten over their hesitation. She started to say thank you without looking up. And then she registered the hands. She knew those hands. She had known those hands when they were rougher, younger, before whatever decade of wear and work had changed them slightly. She knew the particular shape of those knuckles, the way the left thumb bent slightly outward from a break that hadn't healed clean. She knew, without understanding how she could possibly be certain of something she hadn't seen in 18 months, that those were Dante Calder's hands. Her lungs did something complicated, very slowly, because part of her believed that if she moved too quickly, the world would snap back to the ordinary version of this moment. She lifted her eyes from the floor. Dante Calder was 41 years old. He was not a physically imposing man in the way movies sometimes suggested powerful men had to be. Not enormous, not visibly threatening, nothing about his appearance that would make a stranger on the street look twice. But there was something in how he occupied space that was impossible to ignore once you were paying attention. The absolute stillness of him, the quality of his attention. Like a man who had long ago stopped needing to perform any version of himself for anyone, and the absence of that performance made everyone around him quietly aware that they were being permitted to exist in proximity to something they didn't fully understand. He was crouching beside her on the floor of the Alara boutique, picking up silk scarves, and he was looking at her. Not at her face yet, at her. His eyes moved down, registered what was obviously and unmistakably visible, and for a moment, barely a second, something happened in his expression that Mara could not have named if she'd been given a week to think about it. It wasn't shock exactly. It was more like a man watching a building he thought he'd left behind come into sudden, unwanted focus through a window he hadn't expected to look through. He looked up and met her eyes. Mara. One word. Her name, in that voice, in that specific register. Not loud, not sharp, just her name said, with the certainty of a man who had practiced staying calm in rooms where staying calm was the hardest possible thing. She realized she had stopped breathing somewhere between seeing his hands and now. Behind them, the woman in the white coat had gone very quiet. The assistants behind her had gone very quiet. The entire boutique had achieved a stillness that was more than just polite attention. It was the stillness of people who had recognized something in the air that they couldn't name but absolutely felt, the way you feel a change in pressure before weather arrives. Dante stood. He stood unhurriedly, scarves in hand, and turned to face the woman in the white coat. She had clearly placed him by now. Mara could tell by the way the woman's chin had dropped slightly, her phone no longer visible, her hands at her sides. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Pick them up. The woman blinked. I'm sorry? The ones she hasn't gotten to yet. Pick them up. Two of the watchers near the doorway quietly left. The salesgirl near the back wall had become absolutely motionless. Do you know who? The woman in the white coat started. Yes. He looked at her with the complete, unhurried patience of someone who had been doing this, whatever this was, for a very long time. Do you? A beat of silence that lasted about 4 years. The woman in the white coat reached down and, with visibly shaking hands, picked up the remaining scarves. Dante turned back to Mara. He reached down, not to help her stand, but to offer his hand in the way you offer someone a choice. Palm up, fingers open, available. Mara looked at it. She looked at his face. She had been preparing for this moment, or some version of this moment, in the background of her mind for 18 months, in the way you prepare for something you tell yourself will never happen. She took his hand. He helped her to her feet steadily, with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what he was holding without having to be told. Then he looked down. And for the first time fully, without the distraction of the marble floor and the scarves and the watching crowd, he looked at the very clear, unmistakable shape of a 7-month pregnancy. His jaw set. Not with anger exactly, but something that had no clean name. Whose baby is it? He asked. His voice was quiet, completely even. The kind of quiet that isn't gentle. It's the quiet of something that has gone too still. Mara opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She had rehearsed answers for this. She had full sentences, constructed carefully over months, that covered every version of this conversation she'd imagined. She had reasons, good ones, reasons that made sense, when she lay awake at 3 a.m, listening to her husband breathe in the other room and told herself she had made the right choices for the right reasons. She had all of that, and when she opened her mouth to use it, she had nothing. Her silence, 6 seconds, maybe 8, said more than she'd said to him in a year and a half. Dante looked at her belly. He looked at her face. He looked at something in the middle distance for a moment, the way a person looks when they are doing rapid, private arithmetic that nobody else in the room can see. Then he said quietly, to her alone, "We need to talk." Not a question, not a demand exactly. The statement of someone who has just understood that a conversation is going to happen one way or another, and has decided he would rather it happen with some degree of privacy and dignity than in the middle of a boutique floor with 35 witnesses. Mara nodded. She didn't know why she nodded. She had not planned to cooperate with this. She had a shift ending at 2, a husband expecting her home by 3, a life constructed with extreme care around the specific absence of Dante Calder, and she nodded. The woman in the white coat said something to one of her assistants as Dante guided Mara toward the boutique exit, his hand not quite touching the small of her back, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of it, and neither of them turned around to hear what she said. Outside in the corridor, a few people watched them walk. Some recognized Dante. Others just recognized whatever it was he projected when he moved through a public space. That quality of having already decided every important thing about a room before he entered it. Mara looked straight ahead. Her hands were at her sides. Her back hurt. Her knees still ached faintly from the marble. She thought about the peanut butter sandwich in her locker in the service corridor. She thought about the banana that was slightly too ripe. She thought about how the worst days never announced themselves, how they arrived looking like ordinary Tuesdays, and how she had made it all the way to 10:45 a.m. before this one finally showed her what it actually was. And she thought about the question she hadn't answered. Dante had asked it quietly, and he'd left it in the air between them where it would stay, getting heavier, until she found the courage, or the circumstance, or the corner she'd been backed into that would finally force the truth out of her. Whose baby is it? She didn't know yet that Dante had already begun suspecting the answer. She didn't know that he had looked at her, looked at the timeline, and started doing the math the moment her silence began. And she did not know, could not have known, standing there in the corridor of the Caldwell Center with the baby pressing gently against her ribs, and Dante Calder walking beside her for the first time in a year and a half, that this was the moment the rest of her life had been waiting on. The morning had not started badly, but it had just become something else entirely. There was a car waiting. Of course there was a car waiting. Dante Calder did not exist in a world where cars weren't waiting. Mara had forgotten that, or told herself she'd forgotten it, which was a different thing entirely. And seeing the black sedan idling at the service exit of the Caldwell Center with a driver who didn't look at either of them when they approached was a small, sharp reminder of exactly who she had walked out of the boutique beside. She stopped at the curb. "I have a shift." "Until 2, Dante said. "It's 10:53. She looked at him. "You don't know my schedule." "I know you've been working here for 4 months. He said it without inflection, without apology. "I know your supervisor is a man named Gerald Poole, who has written you up twice for taking extended breaks, which is apparently what they call sitting down when your back hurts." Mara felt the back of her neck go hot. Not from embarrassment, from something closer to the specific violation of being known about without your consent. "You had someone watching me." "I had someone watching the building." A pause. "You happened to be in it." "That's not the same thing, and you're aware of that." He looked at her steadily. The driver hadn't moved. A woman walking past with a stroller gave them a wide berth without understanding why. "Get in the car, Mara." "Tell me where." "Somewhere you can sit down." His eyes dropped, briefly, to the visible weight she was carrying, then back up. "That's all." She got in the car. She told herself it was because her back was genuinely killing her, and the marble floors of the Caldwell Center were not designed with pregnant women in mind. She told herself it had nothing to do with the fact that after 18 months of rehearsing this conversation in her head, some exhausted part of her had simply decided it was time to stop rehearsing. The car moved into traffic. Neither of them spoke for the first 3 minutes. Mara watched the city slide past the window. October light on the buildings, the kind of flat mid-morning gold that didn't warm anything. She kept her hands folded in her lap over her belly, a habit she'd developed without realizing it, like her hands needed to be there whenever she felt uncertain. "You look tired," Dante said. "I'm 7 months pregnant and I've been on a marble floor since 7 a.m. "That's not what I mean." She turned from the window. "I know what you mean." I was watching her with that quality of attention she had never figured out how to describe to anyone who hadn't experienced it. Like being read by someone who already knew most of the story and was just waiting for you to confirm the parts he'd filled in himself. It had unnerved her once. She had eventually found it comforting. Then she had left, and the memory of it had become something she preferred not to examine too directly. "How long have you been married?" he asked. Her stomach clenched. "Dante, I'm not asking to fight. I'm asking because I want to understand the timeline." "The timeline?" She said it flatly. "Yes. You want to understand the timeline." "Mara." His voice didn't rise. It never rose. "How long?" She looked back out the window. A bus pulled alongside them at a red light and then pulled ahead. 14 months. Silence. And before that, between when you left and when you married him. How long was that? She understood what he was calculating. She understood it with a clarity that made her feel slightly sick, because she had done the same calculation herself approximately 900 times in the past 7 months, and the math never changed no matter how many times you ran it. 4 months, she said. More silence. Longer this time. So when you left, he started. I didn't know. She turned to face him fully. When I left, I did not know. That is the truth. I'm telling you that is the truth. He looked at her for a long moment. She couldn't read what was behind his eyes, which had always been the problem with Dante. He was not a man whose face told you everything. He was a man whose face told you what he decided to let it tell you, and the rest lived somewhere inaccessible. When did you find out? He asked. She didn't answer immediately. The car had stopped in front of a building she recognized, not one of Dante's obvious addresses, not the penthouse in the financial district that she knew about from before, but a quieter building, limestone, older, a place designed to be uninteresting from the outside. 6 weeks after I left, she said. Dante got out of the car. He came around and opened her door, not because he was performing chivalry, she understood, but because he needed something to do with his hands. She accepted the help getting out because her center of gravity was not her own anymore, and the curb was higher than it looked. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment. And you married Victor Dane, Dante said. Yes. 4 months after you found out. Yes. He nodded once, very slowly. The nod of a man who is absorbing information he has already half prepared for, but that still lands harder than preparation allowed for. Come inside. The apartment was on the 4th floor, small by Dante's standards, which meant it was still larger than anything Mara had lived in since leaving. Clean lines, minimal furniture, the kind of space that had been set up for function rather than comfort, like a room you kept available rather than lived in. There was a couch. Dante guided her toward it with a gesture rather than words, and she sat, and the relief in her lower back was immediate enough that she exhaled without meaning to. He stood near the window. He did not sit. Tell me about him, he said. Victor? There's nothing to tell that matters right now. Let me decide what matters. She looked up at him. The light from the window was behind him, which made his expression harder to read. She thought about the version of this conversation she had prepared, the one with the logical explanations and the reasonable justifications. And she thought about how completely none of that felt available to her at the moment. He was kind, she said. When I met him, he was kind. He had money, and he was kind. And I was pregnant and alone, and I had made the decision to keep the... She stopped, reorganized. I had made a decision, and I needed somewhere stable to make that decision from, and Victor offered stability. That's not what I asked. I know what you asked. Does he treat you well? She held his gaze. Yes. A beat. Mara. He treats me well. She said it again, with the particular steadiness of someone who has decided what the answer to a question is going to be and intends to stay with it. Dante looked at her for 4 full seconds. Then he turned slightly toward the window. She watched his jaw work, that small muscle near the hinge of it, the one she'd learned to read years ago as the external signal of something being processed internally that wasn't going to come out as words yet. You left, he said, because of what I do. It wasn't a question. She answered it anyway. Yes. You thought Victor Dane was safer. I thought a man without enemies who wanted to kill him was safer for a child to grow up near. Yes. And now you're standing in a building I own because you were on your knees on a marble floor picking up someone else's mess while 7 months pregnant because Victor Dane's idea of providing for you is a cleaning shift at a shopping center. The sentence landed with precision. She felt it land. She didn't flinch because she'd had months of practice not flinching at things that deserved a flinch, but she felt it. Victor's business has been going through a difficult quarter, she said. Victor's business has been going through a difficult quarter, Dante repeated. Slowly, each word given its own space. Then, okay. Don't do that. What? That thing where you repeat what someone says back to them like they're a child who just said something they should be embarrassed about. I'm not doing anything. He turned back from the window. I'm listening. Keep going. She held his gaze and said nothing. The apartment was very quiet. From outside came the muffled rhythm of mid-morning traffic. The baby shifted, a long, slow roll that pushed against Mara's right side, and she put her hand there instinctively. Dante's eyes tracked the movement of her hand. Something in his face changed. Not dramatically, nothing you could point at and name, just a slight alteration in the set of it, like a camera adjusting its focus without changing what it's pointed at. "Does he know?" "No," Dante asked. "He knows I was pregnant when we met. He knows it's his." She met Dante's eyes. As far as he's concerned, it's his. The silence this time had a different quality. Denser. The kind of silence that forms around a truth that's been said out loud for the first time and now exists in the room as a physical presence. "You told him it was his," Dante said. "I told him the baby was mine and I needed a husband and I loved him." She kept her voice even. Two of those things were true. Dante was very still. She watched him absorb that, the math of it, the implication of it, the fact that for 14 months, a man named Victor Dane had been living with the assumption that the child Mara was carrying belonged to him. She watched Dante sit with that information without saying anything, and she understood that his silence was not the silence of a man who had no reaction. It was the silence of a man with too many reactions simultaneously and the discipline to not let any of them out until he'd decided which ones were useful. "I need you to not do anything," she said, "with that information. Whatever you're thinking right now, I need you to not act on it." "I haven't done anything." "You're thinking about it." "I think about everything," he said. "It doesn't mean I act on all of it." "Dante, I heard you." He moved from the window, not toward her, just a redirect of energy, to a kitchen counter where he poured 2 glasses of water without asking and brought one to her. She took it. He sat down across from her, which was the first time he'd sat since the car, and the action made him seem briefly, slightly more like someone she used to know. "I heard you," he said again, quieter. "I'm not going to blow up your life today, but you're going to eventually." He looked at her steadily. "I don't know what I'm going to do. I found out 11 minutes ago that I might be a father." A pause. "That sentence feels insane to say." "I know." "Do you?" He wasn't accusing. He was just asking, with the genuine bewilderment of someone trying to locate the edge of something enormous. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've had 7 months to live with this information, and I've had 11 minutes, and you seem very calm about asking me to make permanent decisions in 11 minutes. She stared at her water glass. "I'm not calm. I'm practiced." Something in his expression shifted at that. Not softened, exactly. Recognized something, maybe. "Why did you really leave?" he asked. "I told you. You told me the reason that made the most sense. I'm asking for the real one." She looked up. "Those are the same thing." "They're not." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees. "You left in March. My business was no more dangerous in March than it had been in January, or the January before that. You didn't leave because of something that happened. You left because you decided something. And I've had 18 months to wonder what that decision actually was. And I would like, now, tonight, with you sitting here, I would like the honest version." She was quiet for a moment. The traffic outside continued its indifferent rhythm. The baby was still now, that particular stillness that sometimes happened, like the child inside her was also listening. "I loved you," she said. "That's the honest version. I loved you and I was terrified of how much I loved you, and I found out I was going to have a baby and I thought—" She stopped, looked at the wall. "I thought that if I stayed, I would spend the rest of my life loving you and being afraid, and I couldn't give a child that. I couldn't give them a mother who loved their father and spent every day scared that today was the day someone came to take him away from them." Dante said nothing. "So I left," she said. "And I thought, I genuinely believed, that the fear would go away if you weren't there to cause it, and it didn't. It just became a different kind of fear, but at least the different kind was one I'd chosen." The silence lasted a long time. "Victor," Dante said finally, "does he know about me?" "He knows we were friends when we were younger." "Friends? Yes." "That's what we were." She looked at him. He looked back. The word sat between them like a small stone dropped into water, neither of them watching where the ripples went. "That's what I told him," she said quietly. Dante stood. He moved to the window again. That same motion, the redirect, the way he processed things physically by putting distance between himself and whatever he was processing. She let him. She'd forgotten that about him too, or chosen to forget it, that he needed space to think the way other people needed silence. "I want a paternity test," he said. Her chest tightened. "Dante, not to use against you, not to take anything. I want to know." He turned. His expression was stripped of the careful neutrality he'd been maintaining. What was underneath it was something raw, something she recognized from much longer ago. The face of a man who grew up with nothing and learned very early that certainty was a luxury you had to build yourself because the world would not hand it to you. "I need to know. You understand that, don't you? I need to know if that baby is mine." She understood it. She did. She understood it in the same place she understood that she had been carrying this secret for 7 months, and that the weight of it had become so routine she'd forgotten. It was a weight at all, the way you stop feeling the pressure of water when you've been deep enough for long enough. "If I agree," she said carefully, "and the test says what we both think it will say, what happens then?" "I don't know yet." "I need more than that." "I know you do." He crossed back toward her, stopped at a distance that wasn't close but wasn't far. "I don't have more than that right now. I have 11, now about 45 minutes, of knowing this might be true. I can't give you a plan in 45 minutes. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she'd been avoiding since the boutique floor, the way she'd been afraid to because looking at him directly meant acknowledging that time had not done what she'd hoped time would do. "You have to go back," he said. "Your shift ends at 2. You should be there when it ends." She blinked. She hadn't expected that. "You're letting me leave." "You were never a prisoner." "That's not—" She stopped. Started again. I mean you're not going to push this today. I told you I wouldn't blow up your life today." He held her eyes. "I keep my word. That has never changed." She stood. Slowly, the baby's weight shifting as she rose, one hand going automatically to the side of her belly. Dante reached out to steady her elbow, just for a second, and then let go. "The test," he said. "When the baby comes. I want it." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. She didn't know, walking back to the car he'd arranged for her, that the word "okay" had just started a clock. She had no way to stop. She didn't know that Dante, standing at that 4th-floor window watching the car pull into traffic, had already taken out his phone. And she did not know that across the city, in an office with a view of a different part of the same October sky, Victor Dane was receiving a phone call from his financial manager that was going to transform him, very quickly, into a version of himself that Mara had not yet met. The test came 8 weeks later. The birth came 2 days after that. And when Dante walked into the hospital room, not announced, not invited, but there, the way he had always simply been where he decided to be, and saw the infant in the bassinet beside Mara's bed, he stopped walking. He had told himself, on the drive over, that he was prepared for either outcome. He had been very deliberate about that. He was a man who had survived by not letting outcomes surprise him, by gaming every scenario in advance until the actual event was just the version of a thing he'd already lived through in his head. The baby was 6 hours old, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. A boy. Dante looked at the infant's face for maybe 3 seconds. Then he sat down in the chair beside the bed, the one closest to the bassinet, without saying anything. He sat forward, elbows on knees, hands loosely clasped, and looked at the child with the absolute focus of a man who has just seen something irrefutable and is letting the irrefutability of it land at whatever pace it needs to land. Mara watched him from the bed. She was exhausted in a way that had moved past normal human exhaustion into something almost geological, deep and layered, and too vast to fully account for. She had been awake for 22 hours. She had delivered this baby with Victor pacing in the hallway outside because he had a phone call he needed to take. And she had held this infant in the first minutes of his life, with the particular loneliness of a woman who is not alone but feels like she is. "His name," Dante said. Not a question exactly, but not quite a statement. "I named him Eli." She watched his face. Victor wanted something else. "I named him Eli." Dante nodded slowly. He reached out. She saw him hesitate for just a fraction of a second before his hand moved, a hesitation so brief it might have been imagined, and very gently, with one finger, touched the back of the infant's hand where it rested against the bassinet blanket. Eli's fingers curled, an involuntary response, a reflex. The baby's tiny hand closed slightly around Dante's finger. Something in the room shifted. Mara felt it. She watched it happen in Dante's face. Not dramatically, nothing she could have described to anyone who hadn't been there. Just the silent, total arrival of something that had been theoretical until this moment, and was now no longer theoretical. Something that looked, in the specific quality of stillness it produced in him, like the opposite of everything he had built his life around. The test results had come in 48 hours before the birth. Dante's lawyer had called him. Dante had not called Mara to tell her he had the results. He had simply arrived at the hospital 6 hours after the birth was posted. She would wonder, later, how he'd known so quickly, and would decide there were things she was better off not knowing, and sat in the chair beside her son's bassinet with the expression of a man who already knew the answer to every question in the room. "He's mine," Dante said quietly. Not a question, not, finally, a calculation, just the words. Said to the room, or to himself, or to the infant, whose fingers were still curled loosely around his finger. "Yes," Mara said. He sat with that for a long time. Then the door opened. Victor Dane came back from his phone call. He was 44, Victor. Not physically impressive, medium height, the kind of build that suggested a former athlete who had spent a decade behind a desk. A good suit, well-fitted, a face that, when relaxed, conveyed the sort of bland competence that made people assume he was trustworthy without ever examining why. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Dante. Mara watched the moment happen, watched Victor's eyes move from her to the bassinet to the man sitting beside it with his finger lightly held by a 6-hour-old infant. "Who is this?" Victor asked. His voice was pleasant. Professionally pleasant, the kind of pleasant that isn't warmth but is so well practiced it can pass for it in poor lighting. Mara opened her mouth. "Old friend," Dante said. He didn't stand. He didn't turn fully. He looked at Victor over his shoulder with the unhurried ease of someone who has already assessed every exit in a room and found them all manageable. "We grew up together. I heard the news, wanted to stop by." Victor's eyes went to his wife. Mara kept her expression neutral. The skill required to keep her expression neutral at this moment was not small. "Mara didn't mention you were in town," Victor said. "I wasn't," Dante said. "I am now." Victor looked at his son in the bassinet. He looked at the man beside it. Something moved in his face, quick and then controlled. He was good at controlled, Victor. That was something Mara had come to understand slowly, over 14 months. The control was not the same thing as the calm it resembled. "Well," Victor said, and smiled the professional smile. "Thank you for stopping by." The door was still open behind him. The implication was clear. Dante stood. He looked at the baby one more time, the kind of look that had the quality of a decision being made, privately, finally, without any more deliberation available to it. Then he looked at Mara. She held his gaze. He walked to the door, shook Victor's hand with the brief courtesy of two men who understand each other without having said anything, and left. Victor closed the door. He stood there for a moment with his back to her. Then he turned. "How long have you known him?" he asked. The pleasant voice was still there, just slightly less smooth at the edges. "Since we were teenagers," Mara said. "I told you about him. I said we were friends." "You said you had a friend named Dante." Victor moved to the bassinet. He looked at the baby with the face he put on for the baby. Attentive, tender, the correct expression. "You didn't say he was that kind of person." "What kind of person?" Victor picked up his son. He held him with practiced competence. "The kind people move out of the way for." She watched her husband hold her child. She watched his hands, careful, controlled, doing everything correctly. And she thought about Dante's hands on the boutique floor this morning, picking up silk scarves in a luxury shopping center without being asked, without an audience, without it meaning anything to anyone who didn't already know what it meant. "He's just someone I used to know," she said. Victor looked at her over the baby's head. His expression had that quality she'd been learning to read, the one that came after the professional pleasantness, and before whatever lived beneath both of those things. "Okay," he said. He said it the same way Dante had said it, earlier in the apartment. The same word, completely different weight. That night, After Victor had gone to get coffee and the ward had settled into its late-hour quiet, Mara lay in the hospital bed with Eli sleeping against her chest and stared at the ceiling and understood, with a clarity that had nothing comfortable in it, that she had built two separate fires in two separate rooms and they were both burning toward the same wall. She had left Dante to escape danger. She had chosen Victor to find safety. And something in the way Victor had said okay, in the way his eyes had stayed on her face a beat too long, in the way he had held their son with hands that were perfectly correct and somehow entirely wrong, told her that the wall between those two fires was much thinner than she had spent 14 months telling herself it was. The baby breathed against her chest, small, steady, entirely unaware of the specific geometry of the situation he had been born into. Mara pressed her lips to the top of his head. She thought, I have made every decision for the right reasons. She thought, I don't know if that matters anymore. And in the corridor outside, a nurse walked past the door and didn't notice the man standing at the far end of the hall near the elevator bank. A man in a charcoal gray suit who had not yet pressed the button to go down, who was standing with his phone in his hand and his back to the ward, very still, in the specific posture of someone who has just made a decision they cannot unmake and is giving themselves exactly the time between deciding and acting that they've always allowed themselves. 30 seconds. Then Dante pressed the button, stepped into the elevator, and made the call. The call Dante made in that hospital corridor lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Mara would never know exactly what was said. She would piece together the edges of it later, over weeks and months, the way you reconstruct a broken thing by finding where the cracks started, not from the center outward, but from the outside in, one fragment at a time. What she would eventually understand was that the 4 minutes and 20 seconds in that elevator corridor were the moment the situation stopped being personal and became something with a momentum of its own. The kind of momentum that doesn't ask anyone's permission and doesn't slow down because someone needs more time. But that understanding came later. In the hospital room, the night of Eli's birth, what Mara had was the baby's weight against her chest and the particular silence of a ward at 2 in the morning and Victor's coffee going cold on the bedside table because Victor had come back from getting it, set it down, kissed her forehead with the careful tenderness of a man performing tenderness, and fallen asleep in the recliner chair with his phone face down on his chest. She watched him sleep. She did that for a while. Tried to find, in the slack lines of his sleeping face, the man she had decided to marry, the one who had been kind when kindness was what she'd needed most. He was there, she thought, somewhere under the controlled pleasantness and the too long looks and the word okay that had landed wrong. He was there because he had been there once, and people didn't disappear entirely, they just got covered over. She thought, I still believe that. She thought, I'm not sure belief is enough. Eli made a small sound in his sleep. Not crying. Something smaller, more like punctuation. Mara shifted him against her chest, and he settled, and she pressed her cheek to the top of his head and breathed in the specific smell of him, that impossible newborn smell that nobody can adequately describe to someone who hasn't held a new infant. And she thought about Dante's finger and the way Eli's hand had curled around it without being asked. Reflex, she told herself. She told herself that several times. 6 weeks passed. 6 weeks of the particular suspended reality of new parenthood. The feedings at 2 and 4 and 6 a.m. The learning of a new person who communicated entirely through sound and weight, and the specific quality of their crying, the way the world narrowed to a radius of about 10 feet around whoever was holding the baby. Victor was present for this in the way that some men are present. Physically there, occasionally helpful, performing the correct version of new fatherhood for any audience that might be watching, and in the spaces between those performances, somewhere else entirely. He had begun working late. This was new. Before Eli, Victor's hours had been regular to the point of rigidity. Home by 7, dinner at 7:30, the routine of a man who believed structure was the same thing as stability. After Eli, the late night started. At first once a week, then twice, then 3 times in a single week in the second month, and when Mara asked, which she did once, carefully, in the tone she had learned to use for questions that required care, he said the business was going through another difficult quarter, and there were investors to manage. She nodded. She had learned to nod. The thing about living with someone who had become slightly frightening was that it happened so gradually you couldn't identify the exact moment it began. There was no single event she could point to, no one morning she woke up and thought, this has changed. There was instead an accumulation of small things. The way he moved through a room when he was on the phone, angling himself away from her. The way he looked at Eli sometimes, not with cruelty, nothing she could name as cruelty, but with a kind of calculation she hadn't seen in him before, as though the baby were a variable he was trying to account for. The way he had, twice now, picked up her phone from the counter when she'd left it there and set it back down in a different position and said nothing about it. She started keeping her phone in her pocket. She started learning, without realizing she was learning it, to be smaller than she was. It was a Tuesday in December, 5 weeks after Eli's birth, when Dante's investigator first made contact, not with Mara. She would learn this later, that the first contact had been lateral, oblique, the way Dante did everything when he was moving carefully. A woman named Sheila, who described herself as a financial compliance researcher, had begun asking questions in the circles adjacent to Victor Dane's business world, asking about outstanding debts, about the specific architecture of certain investment structures, about a series of payments made 18 months prior to parties whose identities were notably difficult to verify. Mara knew none of this on the Tuesday it began. What she knew on that Tuesday was that Eli had slept for 4 hours in a row the night before, which felt like an event worth commemorating, and that she had made coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the December street while the baby napped, and that when Victor came down for breakfast he was already on his phone, already carrying the specific tension in his shoulders that had become his default state, and that he looked at her across the kitchen with an expression she had not seen on him before. It lasted about 2 seconds, that expression. Then the professional pleasantness came back down over it like a curtain. But she had seen it. It was the look of a man who suspects he is being watched and is trying to determine by whom. She poured him coffee without being asked. He took it without thanking her. He went back to his phone. She stood at the window and understood, with the quiet certainty of someone whose instincts had been muffled for 14 months by the daily work of survival, that something was accelerating and she did not have enough information to know in which direction. She texted Dante that afternoon. From her phone, which was in her pocket. The message was 4 words. We need to talk. His response came in 40 seconds. I know. Tonight. Same building. She arranged for Victor's sister, the only family of his she had any relationship with, a woman named Diane, who liked Eli and had no particular feelings about Mara either way, to sit with the baby. She told Victor she was going to a postnatal checkup. He nodded without looking up from his laptop. She drove herself. She was aware, halfway there, that she was checking her rearview mirror more than usual. She wasn't sure if that was reasonable precaution or the beginning of paranoia. She wasn't sure lately where the line between those two things was. Dante was already in the apartment when she arrived. He was on a call. She heard his voice through the door before it opened, low and clipped, the specific cadence of a conversation he was concluding because she'd arrived and not because it was finished. He said 2 words she couldn't make out, and the call ended. He looked better than she'd seen him look in the hospital. Or not better. Sharper. The way a man looks when he's been working on something with total focus. That specific alertness that lives behind the eyes of people who are operating at their full capacity rather than maintaining. She sat on the same couch. He sat across from her. No water this time. No preliminary conversation. Tell me about Victor's business, he said. She blinked. What? His company, the structure of it. Who invests, who he reports to, where the money comes from, and where it goes. Tell me what you know. I don't know much. I'm not involved in his... I know you're not involved. I'm asking what you've observed. In 14 months of living with the man, Mara. What have you seen? She looked at him carefully. Why are you asking me this instead of telling me what you've already found? Something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, or not only that. The recognition of a person who is thinking clearly when they might have chosen not to. Because I want to know if what you've seen matches what I've found, he said. And because what I've found is serious enough that I need to know how much you already knew. Is that a question? It's a question. She held his gaze. I didn't know anything. I married him because he was stable. I have been telling myself he was stable. I have been... She stopped, swallowed. What did you find? Dante was quiet for a moment. the kind of quiet that preceded something that was going to change the shape of the room. Victor Dane's company is insolvent, he said. Has been for approximately 2 years. The investment portfolio he presented when you met him was a fabrication. Shell companies, circular funding, the kind of structure that looks like prosperity from the outside and is hollow all the way through. He owes money to 3 separate parties who are not the kind of people you owe money to without consequences. One of them, he paused, one of them operates in spaces adjacent to my world, not directly connected, adjacent. Mara stared at him. The safe life, Dante said, without cruelty, which almost made it worse. The respectable man. Stop. Her voice came out thin. She cleared her throat. Stop. I'm not saying this to make a point. I know why you're saying it. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a moment, breathed, dropped her hands. How bad is it? The debt is significant. The men he owes are losing patience. There are conversations happening that suggest Victor has been exploring options for how to resolve the situation that don't involve actually paying what he owes. What kind of options? Dante looked at her directly. The kind that involve leverage, things he has that other people want, information, access, assets. A pause. People. The word landed in the room and stayed there. He wouldn't, she started. I don't know what he would do, Dante said. That's the honest answer. I don't know him well enough to know his floor, but I know the people he owes, and I know that when men in serious debt start exploring options under pressure from those particular people, the options they arrive at are generally very bad. Mara sat very still. She was aware of her own breathing, too shallow, too fast. She made herself slow it down. In through the nose, out, in. Eli is at home with Victor's sister right now, she said. I know. I need to go back. In a minute. His voice was steady, not dismissive, the steadiness of someone keeping the pace of a conversation that needed to be finished. There's something else. She looked at him. He's been looking into you, Dante said. Into your past, specifically into the period before you married him. He has someone, I don't know who, not yet, who has been pulling records, your old addresses, employment history, and he stopped for exactly 1 second. He has a photograph. A photograph of what? Of us, together, from about 2 years ago before you left. Someone pulled it from a business event you both attended. It doesn't prove anything on its own, but combined with the questions he's apparently been asking about the timing of your pregnancy. He knows, Mara said. He suspects, Dante said. There's a difference. Not to Victor there isn't. She was on her feet. She didn't remember standing. Her coat was on the chair behind her, and she reached for it with hands that were not quite steady. Not to Victor there isn't a difference. Mara, he's been different for weeks. She was moving toward the door. I thought it was the business. I told myself it was the business. It wasn't the business. She stopped with her hand on the door handle, turned back. He holds Eli differently than he used to. I noticed it, and I told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't imagining it. Dante was standing now too. You can't go back there tonight and let on that you know any of this. I'm aware. He can't know you've spoken to me. I'm aware of that too. Her voice had sharpened into something precise and hard-edged that she barely recognized as belonging to her. It was the voice of someone who had just had the floor of their life open up beneath them and had landed somewhere that required a completely different way of moving. What do I do? Tonight, nothing. You go home, you act normal, you give Diana thank you, and send her home. Tomorrow morning, when Victor leaves for work, you take Eli and the documents, the ones for him, his birth certificate, medical records, and you call me. And then what? And then you come here and you don't go back. She stared at him. You're asking me to leave my husband. I'm telling you what I think you need to do for your son. You can't just... She stopped. The fury in her chest was real and immediate, and so was the fear, and they were tangled together in a way that made it nearly impossible to know which one was speaking. You can't just map out my life, Dante. I'm not mapping your life. I'm telling you what I know and what I think. What you do is yours. He held her gaze. It has always been yours. You left me because you wanted to choose. I'm not taking that from you. I'm telling you that I think what you have with Victor is more dangerous than what you left behind, and I need you to hear that even if you're angry at me for saying it." She stood there with her hand on the door handle and her coat half on and Eli's face in her head. That small, sleeping face, the one that had curled its hand around a stranger's finger 6 weeks ago. Not a stranger. She needed to stop calling him a stranger. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About Victor." "How long?" A half-second pause, barely perceptible. "I started looking into him the night of the birth." The night of the birth. She repeated it the way he'd repeated things back to her in that first conversation, slowly, each word. "You started investigating my husband the night my son was born." "Yes." "And you didn't tell me." "I didn't have anything concrete to tell you. I don't work in rumors." "But you were looking, without telling me." "Mara, you made a decision," she said. "You decided to investigate Victor without asking me, without telling me. You decided on my behalf that this was something that needed to be done. And you did it. And you didn't—" Her voice cracked, very slightly, and she steadied it with the focus of someone who had had a lot of practice. "You didn't ask me." The room was very quiet. Dante said nothing for a moment. Then, "You're right. I know I'm right. I should have told you I was looking. I should have told you earlier." He didn't elaborate. He didn't defend himself further. In another man, she might have found that infuriating. In Dante, she recognized it for what it was. The acknowledgement of someone who understood that adding explanations to an apology was a way of taking it back. She stood there for another breath. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. She left. The drive home was 18 minutes. She spent the first 6 of them breathing, deliberately, the way she'd taught herself to breathe in the 3rd trimester when the weight of everything got too heavy and the only tool available was the most basic one. In, hold, out, again. By the time she turned onto the street where she and Victor lived, she had constructed the face she needed. She had learned, in 14 months, how to wear that face. It required a kind of internal splitting. The part of you that was terrified going somewhere very quiet and very still, and the part of you that could smile and say, "Sorry, I'm late." The appointment ran long going to the front. She was good at it. She didn't feel good about being good at it. The house was lit from the inside. Diane's car was still in the driveway. Mara pulled in beside it and sat for 3 seconds. Exactly 3, she counted, and then got out. Inside, Diane was on the couch with Eli asleep in the baby seat beside her, watching something on her phone with the sound low. She looked up when Mara came in and smiled the easy smile of a woman who had no idea there was anything in the room to read carefully. "He just went down about 20 minutes ago," Diane said. "He was an angel." "He's always an angel for you," Mara said, and the words came out warm and normal, and she hated how easily they came. Victor appeared from the kitchen doorway. He had a glass in his hand. Not coffee, something amber. And he looked at Mara with a pleasant expression that she now understood, looking at it with newly calibrated eyes, was a performance. He had always been performing. The difference was that now she could see the seams. "How was the checkup?" he asked. "Good," she said. "Everything's good." He nodded. He looked at his sister. "Thanks, Di. We're good here." Diane gathered her things with the cheerful efficiency of a woman who had places to be and hugged Mara at the door with a warmth that felt, in that particular moment, like the last genuinely simple thing in the room. Then she was gone. Victor closed the door. The house was quiet except for the low sound of Eli breathing in the baby seat. "You were longer than I expected," Victor said. The doctor was backed up. She took off her coat. She hung it on the hook by the door. She did each of these things with the careful ordinariness of someone diffusing something that couldn't be hurried. "You know how it is." He looked at his glass, then at her. "Which clinic?" She met his eyes. "Riverside Women's, same as always." He nodded, took a sip. She went to the baby seat and lifted Eli with the practiced confidence of 6 weeks of practice, settling him against her shoulder, his sleeping weight a particular kind of anchor. She felt, with the baby in her arms, very clear, dangerously clear. The kind of clarity that lives on the other side of fear, when fear has finally gone all the way through you. She needed to get through tonight. One night. She could do one night. She went upstairs. She gave Eli his midnight feeding in the nursing chair in the corner of the room, with the lamp on low and Victor moving around downstairs, and the sound of his glass being set on the counter twice, once with the restraint of a man moderating himself, once with slightly less restraint than the first time. She listened to his movements the way you listen to weather, calibrating. At midnight, she heard him come upstairs. She heard him check the hallway, pause outside the nursery door for a moment. She was in the nursing chair and could see the strip of light under the door narrow slightly, his shadow, and then move on to the bedroom. She sat in the dark with Eli against her shoulder long after he'd fallen back asleep. She was working out what to take. Not emotionally. She had made the decision in the car, in the 6 minutes of deliberate breathing, without fully letting herself acknowledge that she'd made it. Practically. Documents in the green folder in the home office. Eli's hospital bag, still packed with the extra clothes she'd never emptied. Her own bag, which she could load in 10 minutes. Her phone charger. The envelope of emergency cash she'd been keeping in the lining of her winter coat since month 4 of the pregnancy. $50 a week, quietly, in case, because some part of her had always known she might need a case like this. Plan. She had a plan. Then her phone buzzed. She looked at it with Eli still against her shoulder. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered. The voice on the other end was a man she didn't know, and he said 4 sentences. When he was done, he hung up without waiting for a response. Mara sat very still in the nursing chair in the dark. The 4 sentences were, Victor Dane knows who the baby's father is. He's known for 3 weeks. The people he owes money to have been in contact with Dante Calder's organization directly. And you should know that the meeting that was scheduled for tomorrow morning is not about the business. She sat there for a long time. The plan she'd been building in her head over the last 90 minutes, the green folder, the packed bag, the cash in the coat lining, the call to Dante in the morning, had just collapsed into a completely different shape. Tomorrow morning was too late. She looked at Eli's sleeping face in the low light. She looked at the nursery door and the hallway beyond it, and the house she had built around herself in the name of safety. Then she picked up her phone and called Dante. He answered on the first ring. Something's changed, she said. I know, he said. Don't move. I'm already on my way. And downstairs, very quietly, she heard the sound of Victor's footsteps stop at the bottom of the stairs and stay there. And the silence that followed had the specific quality of a man who is standing in the dark of his own house listening to a woman he has decided the footsteps didn't move. That was the thing that made the air in the nursery go thin. Not that Victor was at the bottom of the stairs, but that he had stopped there and stayed. No creak of the floor, sound of him moving to the kitchen or back to the living room. Just the particular weight of a man standing in a dark house at midnight, listening and deciding. Mara had her phone pressed to her ear with Dante's voice in it saying, I'm already on my way, and she could not respond at full volume because 6 feet of floor and a door were all that separated her voice from Victor's ears. She tilted her mouth closer to the phone. How long? She breathed. 20 minutes, maybe less. A pause, and then lower. Is he moving? She looked at the strip of light under the nursery door, the shadow that would tell her if Victor's feet had crossed from the hallway carpet to the bottom stair. Nothing yet. No. Keep him calm. Don't let him know you know anything. Dante. Her voice was barely sound. He's standing at the bottom of the stairs in the dark. A beat of silence. Take Eli into the bedroom, Dante said. Normal. Like you're just putting him down. Lock the bedroom door if there's a lock. If there isn't, put a chair under the handle. There's no lock. Chair. Okay. Don't hang up. Put the phone in your pocket. She did. She settled Eli more firmly against her shoulder. He was asleep, deeply, the way only new infants sleep, with the absolute unconscious trust of someone who has no reason yet to know that the world requires vigilance. The weight of him against her chest was the most grounding thing in the room. She focused on it while she crossed to the nursery door. She opened it slowly. Normal. The way you open a door when you're a tired mother transferring a sleeping baby and the only thing on your mind is not waking him up. Victor was at the bottom of the stairs. He was looking up at her. He had his glass in his hand still, the amber drink, but she noticed immediately that it was the same level it had been 20 minutes ago. He hadn't been drinking. He'd been standing there with a prop. Hey, she said. Soft. The voice she used for after midnight, when the baby was almost down. I'm just putting him in the bassinet. He finally crashed. Victor didn't say anything for a moment. "Come to bed," he said. 2 words. Completely ordinary. She had heard him say them dozens of times. Tonight they had a texture she couldn't name and didn't want to examine. "I'll be right there," she said. 2 minutes. She went to the bedroom. She put Eli in the bassinet with hands that she kept deliberately slow and steady, because the body transmits what the mind is doing whether you want it to or not. And if her hands were shaking, the baby would feel it and wake. And if the baby woke, she would have no reason to be moving around the room in the dark. She settled him. He made the small punctuation sound and went still. She took the wooden chair from the vanity table and positioned it under the bedroom door handle with the focused efficiency of someone following instructions they trust even when they're terrified. Then she stood in the middle of the dark bedroom and waited. Victor's footsteps came up the stairs. Steady, not fast. The footsteps of a man who was also being deliberate. They stopped outside the bedroom door. The handle moved. It moved about a centimeter. The amount a handle moves when someone pushes it from the other side and finds resistance, and then stopped. Silence. Mara stood 3 feet from the door and did not breathe. "Mara." His voice through the door was completely even. "Why is the door blocked?" She said nothing for a moment, then, measuring each word, Eli was restless. "I didn't want the door to open and let the hall light in." A pause that lasted long enough to have a shape. "Open the door." "Victor, I'm exhausted. Can we—" "Open the door." She didn't move. Her heart was doing something she could feel in her throat and her fingertips simultaneously. Not a racing, not yet, but a heaviness, like each beat was landing with more force than usual, her body understanding the situation at a level below the one that was still trying to construct normal sentences. Eli slept 6 feet away, oblivious. "I'm going to sleep," she said. "We can talk in the morning." Silence on the other side of the door. She counted the seconds. 3, 4, 5. Then the footsteps moved away, back down the hall. She heard the guest bedroom door open and close. She let out a breath that hurt coming out, like she'd been holding it in her chest cavity rather than her lungs. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her phone out of her pocket with shaking hands. Dante. Still connected. She could hear very faintly the sound of a car in motion. "He went to the guest room," she whispered. "Good." His voice was low and steady. "That's good. 12 minutes. He knows, Dante, the way he said my name. He knows." "I know he knows. 12 minutes. Can you keep it together for 12 minutes? She looked at Eli in the bassinet, the small chest rising and falling with the absolute reliability of someone who had no idea anything was required of him yet. "Yes," she said. She sat on the bed in the dark and counted minutes by the rhythm of her son's breathing. At the 11-minute mark, she heard it. Not the car, which she'd been listening for, but the guest bedroom door opening again. Footsteps. Not toward the stairs this time, toward the bedroom. The handle moved again. "Mara." Harder this time. Mara moved the chair. She stood. She went to the bassinet and picked up Eli with smooth, practiced motion, his sleeping weight resettling against her shoulder. Then she crossed to the far side of the room, away from the door, and stood with her back against the wall beside the window. The door shuddered. Once. Not a full impact. A single controlled test of resistance, like a man assessing a structure before deciding how to address it. "You're making this worse," Victor said through the door. His voice had changed. The pleasantness was entirely gone. What was underneath it wasn't rage, which would have been easier. Rage was loud, and it announced itself. This was something colder, more organized. "I just want to talk, that's all." "We'll talk in the morning, Victor." "There isn't going to be a morning for this conversation." His voice was very close to the door now, almost against it. "You know that as well as I do. So move the chair and let's do this right. Let's sit down like adults and say the things that need to be said." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't." One word, bitten off clean. "Don't do that. I'm telling you don't do that right now because I am holding it together by a thread, and I need you to not insult me by doing that." Eli stirred against her shoulder. She pressed her hand against the back of his head, steady pressure, willing him back down. He settled. Outside, a car. She felt it before she heard it. Headlights crossing the window blinds, The particular deceleration of a vehicle pulling up to a specific address rather than passing it. Victor heard it too. She knew because the sound at the door stopped. Silence. 3 seconds. 5. Then, "Who is that?" Not a question. The flatness of a man whose calculation had just been confirmed. "I don't know," she said. "Mara." The word was quiet and completely dangerous. "Who did you call?" She said nothing. The door came off the chair. Not violently, not kicked or rammed. Victor had simply found the gap and used force with the controlled precision of a man who understood that panic was inefficient. The chair skittered sideways on the hardwood and the door opened and Victor was in the room. He was still in his shirt from dinner, sleeves rolled to the elbows. His face in the dark was a thing she had not seen before, stripped of all the careful layers, all the performance, all the pleasantness that had been its primary architecture since she'd known him. What was under all of that was a man who was frightened and had decided that being frightened was unacceptable. He looked at her holding the baby against the far wall. He looked at the window. He looked back at her. "You called him," Victor said. She held Eli tighter. "I want to leave," she said. "That's all I'm asking. Let me take Eli and leave tonight and we can handle everything else. That's not your call." "He's my son." "He's my son." Victor said it without heat, which was worse than if he'd shouted it. Legally, on paper, in every way that the world recognizes, he is mine, and you knew that when you married me, and you knew it when you... He stopped. Something moved across his face. "How long have you been planning this?" "I'm not planning anything. I'm asking you to let me walk out of this room." Downstairs, the front door. The sound of it. Not a knock. Just the specific sound of a door being tried by someone who had a different relationship to locked entrances than most people. Victor's eyes went to the ceiling briefly, then back. "You're Mafia boss," he said. "Coming to collect." "Don't..." "What? Don't say it?" His voice was rising now, the control fraying in small visible ways. The muscle in his jaw, the way his hands had become fists at his sides. "I have been living for 14 months in a house with that man's child. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? I have built my whole..." He stopped, pressed his mouth together, breathed through his nose. Footsteps on the stairs, fast but not reckless. Dante appeared in the doorway. He took in the room in the way he always took in rooms. One complete scan, a fraction of a second, that produced a full inventory. Mara against the far wall holding Eli. Victor in the center of the room, fists closed, breathing hard. The skittered chair. The open door. He looked at Mara first. "You okay?" "Yes." He looked at Victor. Victor looked back at him. The two men in the room together produced a specific kind of charge. Not the movie version of two powerful men sizing each other up. Nothing theatrical about it. Just the particular stillness of two people who had each made calculations about the other and were now in the same physical space for the first time, with no audience between them and no pretense available. "You need to leave my house," Victor said. "I will," Dante said. "She's coming with me." "She's my wife." "I know." Dante moved 2 steps into the room. Not toward Victor, toward the angle that put him between Victor and Mara, without making that positioning into a statement. "And I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here because she called me, and because she's holding a 6-week-old infant, and because I think the three of us can either do this badly right now, or we can do it better in the morning through lawyers." Victor laughed. It was not a good laugh. "Lawyers." He looked at the floor, then back up. "You want to talk to me about lawyers? You." His voice had dropped to something almost conversational, which was the most frightening register he'd found yet. "Do you know what I've lost? Do you have any concept, any real concept, of what the last 3 years of my life have cost me? And I stayed straight, I stayed legitimate, I kept everything legal, and then she..." He pointed at Mara without looking at her. "She walks into my life already carrying your child and lets me believe..." "I know what she did," Dante said. Victor blinked. "I'm not defending it," Dante said. "She made a choice, and it wasn't a clean choice, and the consequences of it are standing in this room right now. I know that." He kept his voice measured. "But she was afraid. She thought she was protecting a baby from a dangerous life, and she made the wrong call, and she's been living with that wrong call for over a year. That doesn't make it right. It means she's human and scared, and she was trying to do the best she could with what she had." The room was quiet. Something shifted in Victor's face, not softened, complicated. The expression of a man who had expected a different kind of opponent and didn't know what to do with the one he had. "Get out of my house," Victor said. Quieter now. Not calm, quieter, which was different. "Both of you, take the baby. I need—" He stopped, pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment, then dropped it. "I need you to get out of my house." Mara didn't move immediately. She looked at her husband, at this man she had chosen for safety, at the architecture of his face without its performance, at the specific grief that was living in him under the anger and the fear. She had done that to him. She had walked into his life with a wound she hadn't told him about and let him build something around it, and that was a real thing she had done, and she could not unknow it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I mean that." Victor looked at her. His jaw worked. He said nothing. She crossed the room. She passed within 4 feet of him. He didn't move. Dante walked out first. She followed with Eli against her shoulder. She did not look back from the doorway because if she looked back, she would have to keep looking at the things she had made of Victor Dane's life, and she was not capable of that right now. She needed all of herself for the next 10 minutes. Downstairs, out the front door. The December air hit her like a hand, sharp, cold, immediate. There was a second car on the street she hadn't expected. Not just Dante's black sedan, a second vehicle, dark, parked at the corner, with 2 men she didn't know standing near it. Not aggressive, just present. The specific presence of people who have been placed somewhere because someone anticipated they might be needed. She looked at Dante. "Precaution," he said. "How many people came with you?" "Enough." He opened the sedan's rear door. "Get in and get warm. I'll be 60 seconds. She got in. She held Eli and watched through the window as Dante went back to the front door of the house. Not inside, just to the doorway. Victor was there. She couldn't hear what passed between them. It was brief. Dante said something. Victor said something back. And then Dante turned and walked to the car with the unhurried stride of a man who had closed a door that needed closing. He got in the front passenger seat. The driver, someone she didn't know, didn't look at her in the rear view, pulled away from the curb. "What did you say to him?" she asked. "I told him his financial situation was going to become public knowledge in about 48 hours regardless of anything any of us did or didn't do. And I told him that if he wanted to navigate what came next with any degree of dignity, the path that led to that was letting this go." "And?" "He didn't say yes." Dante looked out the window. "He didn't say no." She looked at Eli. His eyes were open now, that unfocused newborn gaze, looking at nothing in particular or looking at something no one else could see. She had read somewhere that newborns couldn't focus properly for weeks, that what looked like looking was just the random movement of eyes learning what eyes were for. She had never quite believed that. Eli always seemed to her to be looking at exactly what he meant to look at. "Where are we going?" she asked. "The building, the apartment." He glanced back at her. "It's secure. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." She nodded. The car moved through the December city. Empty streets at this hour, the city's overnight version of itself. Quieter, starker, everything more visible, without the crowd of daytime to soften it. She thought she had made it. She thought the worst of tonight was behind them. She was wrong by approximately 14 hours. Victor Dane did not call his lawyer in the morning. He did not call Dante's lawyer. He did not, as Dante had suggested he might, choose the path of legal resolution and whatever dignity remained available in that direction. Victor Dane called the men he owed money to. Mara didn't know this when she woke up in Dante's apartment at 7:15 with Eli demanding his morning feeding with the complete impatience of someone who had no interest in the events of the previous night. She didn't know it when she fed him and changed him and sat in the apartment's bedroom in the morning light, feeling the particular post-crisis flatness that comes when the immediate danger has passed and the body finally lets the exhaustion in. She didn't know it when Dante brought her coffee without being asked and set it on the nightstand and left without trying to have a conversation, which was exactly right, and she felt an absurd and inconvenient gratitude for that. She didn't know it when she fell asleep again with Eli on her chest at 8:30 and slept for 90 minutes with the absolute black dreamlessness of someone whose nervous system had simply shut down the non-essential functions. She found out at 10:20, not from Dante, from one of the men she'd seen on the street the night before, a man named Marcus, broad-shouldered and quiet, who knocked on the bedroom door and waited to be told to come in, and then stood in the doorway with his phone facing her, showing a text thread she wasn't supposed to be able to see. "Mr. Calder said you should know," Marcus said. He said it with the flat brevity of a man relaying information he had been specifically instructed to relay. "He's handling it. He said tell you. He's handling it." She read the thread on Marcus's phone. It was brief. 3 messages, the last one received 40 minutes ago, from a number she didn't recognize. The messages contained no names. They contained a location, an address she didn't know, in the industrial area near the port, a time, which was 2:00 p.m., and a statement that was composed of 12 words but was not, in any meaningful sense, a statement. It was a demand. The 12 words were, "Bring Calder to the terminal alone or the woman won't come home." Mara read it twice. Then she looked at Marcus. "Where is he?" she said. "He said, I heard what he said. Where is he?" Marcus looked at her with the expression of a man who had been given very clear instructions and was now encountering a variable those instructions hadn't accounted for. "He's on a call. He said he'll come to you when, tell him to come now." She was already moving, shifting Eli to her left arm, standing. "Tell him right now, Marcus." 3 minutes later, Dante was in the doorway. He looked at her face and then at Marcus, and Marcus left without being asked. "Sit down," Dante said. Tell me what's happening." "Sit down and I'll tell you what's happening." She sat. Not because he told her to, because her legs were making an argument that had nothing to do with what she wanted. Dante stood with his back against the door frame. He had the look she'd seen on him once before and hadn't been able to name then either. The look of a man who has been moving fast through something and has now arrived at the part where he has to be still. "Victor made contact with the men he owes," Dante said. "He offered them something in exchange for the debt. Information, specifically, about my organization's current operations in the Port District. He has enough proximity to that information from a deal he was involved with peripherally 2 years ago that what he can offer is real, not complete, but real. And in exchange, they take the debt. In exchange, they take the debt, and..." He stopped. "And they gain the ability to make a specific problem for me." She looked at him. "They want to use me." He didn't answer, which was an answer. "They're going to take me," she said, "to get to you. Because they know Victor has a connection to me, and they can make that work without..." She stopped. Her throat had done something complicated. She made herself keep going. "Eli was at home last night. They could have... They didn't. They won't." His voice was the steadiest thing in the room. "Eli is here. You are here. This building has 6 people in it who know exactly what this situation is and what their job is. You are safe right now." "But the message says 2:00. "Yes. That's 4 hours." "Yes." She looked at him. "You're not going alone." "I'm not going at all." He crossed to the chair across from her and sat, leaning forward, elbows on knees, the posture she associated with him when he was thinking out loud. "That's what they want. That's the ask. I go alone to a location they control, and whatever happens next happens on their terms. I'm not doing that." "Then what?" "I'm coordinating with law enforcement, not because I trust them." He said it quickly, preempting the expression on her face. "Because in this particular situation, they want the men at that terminal more than they want anything from me, and that alignment of interest is useful." She stared at him. "You're going to work with the police." "I'm going to work with people who have the same objective I have, which is getting to that terminal at 2:00 with enough resource that the men there don't have options." He held her eyes. "It's not my preferred approach." "But you're doing it." "Because the other approach puts you at more risk, and I'm not doing that either." The room was quiet. She looked at the man across from her, this man she had run from, this man she had spent 18 months building a life designed to exist in the absence of, this man who was now sitting in a chair explaining that he had chosen law enforcement over his instinct because the instinct carried too much risk to her, and she felt something move in her chest that she was not in a position to examine right now and knew it. "What do you need me to do?" she said. "Stay here. With Eli. With Marcus." "Dante. Mara." Not sharp. Exact. "This part is not negotiable. The rest of it, all of it, we can negotiate. This part, today, you stay here." She looked at Eli in her arms. His eyes had closed again. He had the composure of someone who had no information about what was happening, and therefore no reason to be anything other than fully asleep. She nodded. Dante stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked at her for a moment with something in his face that was complicated and unguarded and visible for about 2 seconds before the careful neutrality came back. "I'll be back before 5, he said. "Don't," she said. "Don't tell me that. Don't say something you can't guarantee." He considered this. Then, "I'll do everything in my capability to be back before 5. "That's better," she said. He left. She sat in the chair with her son asleep in her arms and the clock on the phone reading 10:47 and the industrial terminal by the port. A distance she could calculate in both miles and dread, and she thought about what a man does when he has spent his entire adult life building a world based on being the most dangerous person in any given room, and then, one morning in December, chooses to call the authorities because the woman he cannot replace is sitting 4 miles away holding his son. She thought about what that choice cost. She was still thinking about it when, at 12:31 p.m., her phone rang with an unknown number and a voice she didn't recognize said 2 words before the line went dead. The 2 words were, "They moved." And in the hallway outside the apartment, Marcus appeared in the doorway with his own phone to his ear and an expression that confirmed the 2 words before she could ask. And Mara understood with the absolute precision of pure terror that the location had changed, and Dante was already en route to the wrong place, and the 4 people she could see in the apartment were the full extent of what stood between her and a door she hadn't chosen to walk through. She stood up. She handed Eli to Marcus. "Lock the bedroom door," she said. "Stay with him. Don't open it for anyone but me or Dante." "Ma'am," Mr. Calder said. I know what he said. She was already moving toward the window, scanning the street below with the focused attention of someone who has decided that waiting is no longer an option. "Give me your secondary phone." Marcus stared at her. "The one Dante doesn't know about," she said. "Every person who works for him carries one. Give it to me." A long beat. Then Marcus reached into his inside jacket pocket and held out a phone. She took it. She went to the window. She looked at the street below, at the building's exits she had cataloged the first night she'd been here, because cataloging exits was something you learned when you spent enough time being afraid. And she thought about what she knew about the men downstairs and the building's layout and the specific gap between what they expected her to do and what she was actually capable of. She thought about the choice she'd made in a boutique 18 months ago to kneel on a marble floor and not cry. She thought about the woman who had done that and whether she still was that woman and decided the answer was no. She was not that woman anymore. The woman who had knelt on the marble floor and kept her hands steady and refused to cry. That woman had been surviving. Survival was a particular mode, and Mara had lived inside it for so long that she had confused it with living, the way you confuse the smell of a room you've been in too long with fresh air. The woman standing at the window of Dante's apartment with Marcus's secondary phone in her hand was something that had been made in the space between that boutique floor and this moment, and what it was, she understood now, was not patient, not enduring, not waiting for someone else to decide the shape of her life. She looked at the street below, and she looked at the building's exit, and she thought for exactly 45 seconds, which was enough. She called the number she had memorized in the hospital room 6 weeks ago, a number Dante had said once, said it the way people say things they don't expect you to remember, said, "Call this if you ever need something, and I'm not available." She had not written it down. She had never needed to write it down. It rang twice. A woman answered. "Yes. This is Mara Ellison. I need a location pulled on Dante Calder's phone in the last 10 minutes. I need to know where he is right now, and I need to know the address he was traveling to before the route changed." A pause. Not long. "Who authorized?" "He did, 6 weeks ago. Do you want me to give you the phrase, or do you want to waste 30 seconds while he's driving to the wrong building?" Another pause, shorter. "Hold." 40 seconds. Mara stood at the window and watched the street and held. "He's on Meridian heading south. Last confirmed destination was Hanover Terminal, Building C. New intelligence came in 11 minutes ago, indicating the location changed to Port Access Road, Warehouse Block, Eastern End. He doesn't have that update yet. Is there someone who can reach him?" "We're trying. Try faster." She ended the call. She turned to Marcus. He was holding Eli against his chest with the careful incompetence of a large man holding a very small person for possibly the first time, his enormous hands spread wide across the baby's back, in a posture that was simultaneously wrong and somehow working. She looked at her son. Eli's eyes were open. He was doing the unfocused-looking thing, that particular gaze that went somewhere beyond whatever room he was in. She went to Marcus and kissed the top of Eli's head, pressed her lips there for 2 full seconds, felt the warmth of him. "Lock the door," she said. "Don't open it. Ms. Ellison, he needs you more than I do right now." She was already at the apartment door. "Can you do that?" Marcus looked at the baby, then at her. The calculation in his face was visible and brief. "Yes." She left. The stairwell was 4 flights and she took them fast, one hand on the rail, not running. Running would bring attention, and she needed the opposite of attention. She hit the ground floor and went to the building's side exit, the one that came out onto the service alley rather than the main street, because the main street had 2 of Dante's people on it who would stop her, and she didn't have time for the conversation. The December air was colder than midnight had been. A hard, deliberate cold, the kind that got into your collar and your wrists immediately. She had no coat. She had Marcus's secondary phone and the clothes she'd slept in and the specific clarity of someone whose adrenaline had finished the preliminary stages and arrived at the operational one. She needed a car. She looked at the alley. A delivery van, idling, the driver inside with the window up and headphones on. She walked to the passenger side, opened the door, and got in. The driver, 20-something, startled, one earbud half out, stared at her. "What the? I'll give you $400 to drive me to Port Access Road right now." She held up Marcus's phone. "I can transfer it before we get there." He stared at her. "I'm not dangerous," she said. "I'm trying to get to someone before something bad happens to them. $400. It takes maybe 15 minutes. He looked at the phone. At her lack of coat in December. At some internal calculation she wasn't privy to. $450, he said. "Done." The van pulled out of the alley and she called the number again, and this time the woman on the other end said they'd reached Dante. And then the line went complicated. Background noise, voices, and then Dante's voice sharp and close to the phone. "Mara, where are you?" "On my way to Port Access Road." "No." The word came out hard and immediate. "No, absolutely not. You go back to the..." They moved the location. "You were going to the wrong building. Did they tell you?" A pause. 1 second. "Yes, I just got it." "Then you know they've been watching your movements since at least this morning, which means whoever is coordinating this on Victor's side has better information than you thought, which means wherever you go, they'll know before you get there." Silence on the line. "I can get there without them knowing," she said. "I'm in a vehicle they have no reason to watch. I don't have a phone they're tracking. I can get there first." "Mara." His voice had changed. Not softer, stripped. The voice of a man who had run out of the kind of patience that can be performed and was now operating on something raw. "Listen to me. You are not..." "I'm not asking your permission," she said. "I'm telling you what I'm doing. You can work with that, or you can argue about it and waste the next 10 minutes. The line was quiet long enough that she thought he'd ended the call. Then, "Eastern Warehouse. There's a loading dock on the north side. The main entrance will be watched. The dock won't be..." "It's their blind spot. I know the layout." A pause. "You go in. You find a position where you can see the floor and you stay there. You do not engage. You do not reveal yourself. You wait. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Yes." "I mean it, Mara." "I know you mean it. 15 minutes. I'll be there in 15 minutes." She looked out the van window at the city moving past. The port district was ahead. She could see the shift in the skyline, the cranes and the flat industrial geometry of it against the December sky. "I'll be there in 8, she said. She ended the call. The driver glanced at her sideways. He had clearly heard enough to understand that the situation was not what a straightforward 450 delivery job looked like. He said nothing, which she appreciated. He just drove. They reached Port Access Road in 11 minutes. She showed him where to stop. Not at the warehouse itself, 2 buildings down, on the opposite side of the road. She transferred the money from the secondary phone's linked account without speaking. He looked at her one more time before she got out. "You sure about this?" he asked. She thought about that for about half a second. "No," she said, "but I'm doing it anyway." She got out. The Eastern Warehouse was a long, low building, corrugated metal, faded paint, The kind of structure that had been built for function 40 years ago and had been functioning without anyone paying it much attention since. The loading dock on the north side was exactly where Dante had said it would be, and it was exactly what he'd described. A wide concrete platform with a rusted roll-up door at the far end, padlocked, and beside it a smaller access door that was closed. But when she tried the handle with both hands and her full weight against it, not locked. She went in. The interior was large and dim, high ceiling, the kind that absorbed sound rather than reflecting it. Concrete floor. Stacked pallets along the east wall, old ones, the wood gone gray. Some kind of machinery under tarps in the far corner. The air tasted of rust and cold and something chemical she couldn't identify. There were voices. 3 of them. Male. Coming from the far end of the building, where the main entrance would be. The front she'd been told would be watched. She moved along the pallets, staying close to the wall, her footsteps careful on the concrete. Not slow enough to be hesitant, just placed, each step thought about. She found a position behind a stack of pallets that gave her a sight line to the open center of the building while keeping her in shadow. She crouched down. The cold of the concrete came up through her shoes immediately. She could see 3 men. 2 she didn't recognize, the kind of men who had the look of professionals of a particular kind, the specificity of people who had learned economy of movement and expression because excess in either direction was a liability. The 3rd man standing between them was Victor. He looked terrible. She hadn't expected that. She had been carrying an image of Victor from the night before, controlled, dangerous, the face with all its layers stripped off. The Victor she was looking at now had gone past that. He had the specific physical quality of a man who had been awake for 30 hours and had spent those 30 hours running from something he couldn't outrun. His shirt was the same one from yesterday. His eyes had the red-rimmed look of someone who had either been crying or was close to it and had been suppressing it so long it had nowhere left to go. One of the men beside him was on a phone. She caught fragments. 15? Maybe 20. And told him the change. And then a word she didn't catch because a sound outside the building, a vehicle, decelerating, pulled the attention of all 3 men to the main entrance. Then everything happened in a very compressed amount of time. The main doors opened, large industrial doors, the kind that swung wide, and 4 men came in. Not Dante, not law enforcement. 4 men she had never seen, and behind them, a 5th, and the 5th man was the one the other 2 had been waiting for. She understood immediately, because the energy in the room reorganized itself around his arrival, the way rooms reorganized around Dante. Except that what Dante produced in a room was stillness, and what this man produced was a different quality entirely. Something pressurized, something that made the air feel like it had less room in it. She pressed herself tighter against the pallets. The 5th man spoke to Victor in a voice too low for her to catch from across the building. Victor answered. She watched his face while he answered, watched the visible effort of a man trying to maintain a position he had negotiated from a place of weakness, and was now finding out what weakness cost in this particular room. She heard Victor say Calder once. She heard him say 20 minutes. She heard the 5th man say something with the word now in it, and Victor's face changed in a way that told her whatever Victor had promised he could deliver, he was being informed the timeline had just been moved up. She needed Dante here. She looked at Marcus's phone. No signal icon. She moved 2 steps further along the pallets, angling toward the north wall, and the signal came back, 1 bar, barely. She opened the last call and sent a text instead of calling, because voices carried, here, 5 subjects, Victor, 1 appears to be primary, front entrance, move now. She watched the 3 dots that told her it was sending. She watched them for a long time. They went gray. Not delivered. She looked at the signal bar, gone. She looked at the 5 men across the building. She looked at the doors she'd come through. She looked at the pallets, the tarp-covered machinery, the configuration of the space between her position and the far wall, and she did the kind of thinking that has no name. Not planning exactly, more like reading a room at high speed, the same skill she had used on a marble boutique floor when a woman in a white fur coat looked down at her, and she'd had approximately 2 seconds to decide what she was and what she wasn't. Victor was talking again. The 5th man had stepped closer to him, and the 2 others had shifted slightly, and the geometry of the group had changed in a way that put Victor in its center in a way that was not comfortable and was not meant to be. She heard Victor's voice go higher. Not loud, higher in the way voices go when the body is betraying the mind's attempt to stay controlled. She heard him say, "That wasn't the arrangement." She heard the fifth man say something that included the word irrelevant. She heard Victor say her name. She heard it clearly, across the building, in the specific tone of a man using a name as currency he is hoping still has value. Mara. The fifth man looked around the building. She stopped breathing. He was looking in her direction, not at her. His eyes were moving, scanning, and they hadn't landed on her position yet, but they were moving methodically, and the pallets between her and his sightline were good, but not perfect. And there was a gap in the stack at approximately chest height that she was aware of, and he was going to be aware of, in approximately 4 seconds. She moved. Not toward the exit. She moved toward the gap in the pallets, pushed through it on her hands and knees, came out the other side in the open space between the pallet stacks and the tarp-covered machinery, and immediately stood and kept moving, because the worst thing she could do was hesitate, because hesitation in an open space made you a stationary target, and a stationary target was the one thing she could control not being. She was halfway to the machinery when one of the men saw her. He said something sharp in a language she didn't catch, and then in English, "Hey." She did not run. She turned. All 5 of them were looking at her now, the 2 she didn't know. The primary. Victor. Victor's face when he saw her was not what she expected. It wasn't relief, it was horror. Pure, immediate, the specific horror of a man who has just watched the thing he did spin into a consequence he did not intend. Mara. His voice cracked on it. "What are you? You shouldn't be here. You should be—" "Is this her?" the fifth man asked. Victor said nothing. "Is this—" He looked at Mara with the assessing look of someone calculating value. "Calder's?" Still nothing from Victor. "He told me," the man said, "that you were leverage. That if we had you, Calder would come." He looked at Victor. "Is that still true?" Victor looked at Mara. The look lasted about 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, she saw the entire inventory of what he was. The kindness that had been real once, the fear that had broken it, the debt, and the bad decisions, and the man who had stood at the bottom of his own stairs in the dark and listened to his wife make a call, and the specific moral moment that had arrived in the form of a question from a dangerous man in a cold warehouse. "No," Victor said. The man looked at him. "No," Victor said again. Steadier this time, like the word was a thing he was testing his weight on and finding it would hold. "That's not what I said. I said she had a connection to Calder. I didn't say she was leverage. That's not what—" He stopped. His jaw was tight. "Let her leave. She has nothing to do with this. This is between you and me." "Victor," the man said pleasantly, "nothing is between you and me anymore. You have nothing I want. The only thing you had was the information and the access, and you've given me both, so your part in this is—" The doors opened. Not the main entrance. The loading dock. The door she'd come through. It opened, and Dante came through it, and he was not alone. 2 men behind him, and behind them 2 more, and behind all of them the particular presence of people in vests with identifications that none of them were hiding. The fifth man went very still. Dante looked across the building and found Mara in 3 seconds. She watched him find her. The scan, the inventory, the small visible release of something when he confirmed she was standing and unharmed. Then his attention moved to the room, to the 5 men, to Victor, to the primary. "You changed the location," Dante said. "That was a mistake." The primary didn't move. "You brought law enforcement. That's not what we agreed." "I didn't agree to anything," Dante said. He walked forward into the building, unhurried, with the men behind him maintaining their positions near the entrance. "Victor Dane called you. Victor Dane made an agreement on behalf of a situation he didn't own and couldn't deliver on. Whatever he told you I would or wouldn't do is information from a man who doesn't know me." He said, "I know what he said." Dante stopped at the rough center of the building. He looked at the primary. "I know what he offered you. I know what he took from you in that deal 2 years ago, and I know why you've been waiting for a way to make that right. And I'm telling you that the way you've chosen is not going to work because the people at this door have enough to put you away for 8 years minimum, and you standing here is adding to that number every minute." The primary looked at the law enforcement personnel at the door. He looked at Dante. He performed the calculation that a man in his position performs. The calculation of options, of which exits exist, of what the room looks like when you strip away the bluster, and the leverage and count what's actually available. He looked at his two men. They looked at the door. Something went out of the primary's face. Not dignity. Dignity wasn't what that was. It was the specific deflation of a position that was no longer tenable, and it had its own sound, almost, a quality of air leaving a space. Down, Dante said. Not loud, just clear. Hands where I can see them. They went down. The law enforcement personnel moved into the building with the practiced efficiency of people who had trained for this particular choreography and didn't need to be dramatic about it. Cuffs, voices, the routine of an arrest, which is less cinematic up close than any distance makes it seem. Mara stood beside the machinery. She had not moved since Victor said no. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she hadn't been since she'd come through the loading dock door. Not racing, not heavy, just present. The most present it had felt in months, like the body returning to itself after a long time of being asked to be less than it was. Victor had not moved either. I was standing where he'd been when the doors opened, and now the two men who had flanked him were on the floor with their hands behind their heads, and Victor was simply standing, in the middle of the cold warehouse, looking at the cement floor. A man who had come to the end of something and was standing at the edge of it taking stock. Dante reached Mara. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her face, then over her shoulder at the loading dock door, then back at her face. You drove here, he said. Delivery van. You got out of a secure building with no coat in December and got in a stranger's vehicle and drove to an active situation. You were going to the wrong building. He looked at her. I know. And I'm not... She stopped. The steadiness in her voice was real, but it was narrow, the way a bridge is real, but is also exactly as wide as it is and not wider. I'm not going to apologize for that. I know that too. He was still looking at her face with that quality of attention she had spent years trying to describe to herself. Are you hurt? No. Are you cold? She was, she realized, profoundly. The adrenaline had been doing the work her coat was supposed to be doing, and now it was receding and the December air in the warehouse was taking over. She became aware of it all at once. The cold, the shaking that was beginning in her hands, the particular physical aftermath of an hour of fear metabolized into action and now leaving the building. Dante shrugged off his jacket and put it around her shoulders without asking. The warmth of it was immediate and unreasonable. Unreasonable meaning she hadn't expected it to matter as much as it did. Victor, she said. Dante looked across the building. Victor had still not moved. I need to talk to him, she said. Mara, I need to, before anyone else talks to him. She looked at Dante. Please. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped back, not far, just enough. She walked to Victor. He heard her coming and looked up from the floor. His face in the warehouse light was a thing she had not prepared for. Not the controlled version, not the stripped version from the night before, but something past both of those. The face of a man who has just watched himself do something he will have to live with and has not yet found any way to frame it. She stopped in front of him. She didn't know what she had intended to say. She had walked toward him with the certainty of someone who has something that needs to be said, and now she was standing close enough to see the lines around his eyes and the specific gray that had come into his face, and whatever she had intended had been replaced by something simpler and harder. You said no, she said. He looked at her. Yes. To him. When he asked if I was leverage, you said no. A muscle in his jaw moved. What he was doing wasn't, I didn't bring you here for that. I need you to know that. He stopped. Started again, the way you restart a sentence when the first version doesn't carry what you needed it to carry. I made a lot of terrible choices. I did. I know what I did. But I did not bring you here to be used as a bargaining piece. That's not something I'm capable of. She believed him. That was the complicated part. She stood in a cold warehouse looking at the man who had called dangerous people to use as leverage against Dante, and who had believed for 14 months that another man's son was his own, and who had stood at the bottom of his stairs in the dark, listening for evidence of her betrayal, and she believed him when he said that. People, she had come to understand, were not one thing. The capacity for cruelty and the capacity for decency did not cancel each other out. They coexisted in the same person, in the same marriage, on the same night, and the task of living was figuring out how to be around that without losing the thread of who you were. I'm sorry, she said. "For the way I entered your life, for what I withheld, for the cost of it." Victor looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "I know you are. That doesn't fix it." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." She looked at him one more time, the whole of him, the man who had been kind, and the man who had broken, and the man who had just said no in a warehouse when it might have cost him something, and the man who was going to have to answer for the other things he'd done. All of it was true at once. That was the part that didn't resolve neatly, the part that wouldn't fold into a clean narrative. It was just true, the way things were true before anyone decided what they meant. She turned and walked back to Dante. Victor Dane was arrested 40 minutes later. The financial fraud charges had been building for weeks. Dante had been right that they were coming regardless. The warehouse situation added 4 more counts. He was booked and processed with the specific quietness of someone who had arrived at the end of a very long road and had nothing left to spend on resistance. Mara was not there for the arrest. By the time it happened, she was in the back of Dante's car, a borrowed coat around her shoulders, heading back across the city toward a building where her son was being held by a large man who was almost certainly sitting very still and talking to a baby in the too loud voice people use when they want infants to know they're there. She was thinking about the word no, about how Victor had said it, about the weight it had required to say it in that particular room. She was thinking about choices and what they cost and what they meant after the cost was paid. Dante was in the front seat. He had said nothing for the first 10 minutes of the drive, which she understood as his version of giving her space, which she knew because she had once known him very well and was discovering that the things she'd known were still true. "I need to tell you something," she said. He turned his head slightly toward the divider between front and back seats. "Listening." "When I left," she said, 18 months ago, the reason I gave you, that I was afraid for the baby, that I couldn't raise a child in your world, that was true. It was completely true." She paused. "But it wasn't the whole truth." He said nothing, waiting. "I was afraid of loving you," she said. "I had been afraid of it for a long time. Not of what might happen to the baby. I used that as the reason I could say out loud. The real reason was that I loved you enough that losing you would have been the kind of thing I didn't trust myself to survive. And I genuinely believed, that if I left before I had to lose you, I could control the size of the wound." She stopped. "I was wrong about that. Leaving just made it a different kind of wound." The car was quiet. "I'm not saying that to ask for anything," she said. "I'm saying it because I spent 18 months deciding that honesty was a luxury I couldn't afford, and what I've figured out in the last 24 hours is that dishonesty costs more. It just charges you later." Dante was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I knew." She blinked. "What?" "Not the specific reasons. But I knew when you left that it wasn't one thing, that there wasn't a single clean explanation." He glanced back at her. "I know you. I've known you since you were 19 years old, and you told me I was making a mistake getting involved with Rena and his people, and you were entirely right, and I did it anyway, and you stayed anyway. I know how your mind works." A pause. "I always knew the reason you gave wasn't the whole reason." And I spent 18 months being angry about it, and then about 6 months ago I stopped being angry." He looked forward. "Because I understood that the fear was real. You were afraid of a real thing. The thing you used to justify it wasn't the whole truth, but the thing underneath it was real." She sat with that. "What you did wasn't right," he said. "Leaving without telling me. Letting another man believe he was that boy's father. Those weren't right things. I'm not telling you they were." "I know. But you were a person who was afraid, making decisions inside that fear, doing your best with what you had." He was quiet a moment. "I'm not always able to see the distance between that and what I've done in my life, between being afraid and choosing the path that lets you survive the fear." She looked at the back of his head, at the particular set of his shoulders, the way they always carried something even when he was still. "Are you saying you forgive me?" she asked. "I'm saying it's more complicated than forgiveness." He said it without edge. "I'm saying we both made choices that hurt each other, and we're both going to have to figure out what to do with that." A pause. "Together or not together, but we're going to have to figure it out. Together or not together." She looked out the window. The city moved past. Its ordinary afternoon self now. The December streets full of people who had had ordinary days, who had bought coffee and argued with coworkers and texted people they loved, and had no occasion to be in a warehouse on Port Access Road deciding what they were made of. She felt, watching them, something that was almost fond. The ordinary day was a thing she had undervalued. She intended to stop doing that. "Dante," she said. I want to make a decision." He waited. "I want to not go back to the life we had before because that life doesn't exist anymore and probably shouldn't, but I want to build something that's honest." She heard herself say it, and it sounded both right and terrifying, which she was coming to understand was usually the signal that a thing was worth doing. "I want Eli to know who his father is. I want him to grow up without the specific weight of a secret at the center of everything, and I want—" She stopped. Then, because she was done with the habit of leaving sentences unfinished when they needed finishing, "I want to find out if what we had can exist in a version of our lives that neither of us has to be afraid of. I don't know if it can. I'm asking if you want to find out." A very long pause. The car slowed for a light. Outside, a woman pushed a stroller across the intersection. The baby in it was too bundled to see anything but a small round face. "Yes," Dante said, "I want to find out." The light changed. They drove. The weeks that followed were not a resolution. They were work, which is what the other side of a crisis always is. Not a clean landing, but the long, unglamorous process of figuring out what remains. Victor entered a plea arrangement in January. The fraud charges were extensive. His lawyer negotiated 4 years with the possibility of reduction. Mara received the paperwork in a manila envelope that she set on the kitchen table in the apartment she'd moved into temporarily and left there for an entire day before she opened it. When she did, she read every page. She owed him that. The specificity of witnessing what the choices had cost, in numbers and years and procedural language. She owed it to herself, too. She filed for divorce in February. A lawyer Dante had recommended, though she interviewed 3 others first because she needed to make the choice herself. The lawyer was a woman named Paula who asked exactly the right questions and didn't editorialize and sent her bills that were detailed and accurate, which Mara found genuinely comforting. Dante's empire, the word felt theatrical, she always thought, but it was accurate, began a process of visible change. Not overnight, not cleanly. Several of the men who had been with Dante for years didn't take it well, didn't understand why the operational model needed to shift, pushed back in ways that ranged from vocal to quietly dangerous. Dante navigated it the way he navigated most things, with a patience that looked like stillness and was actually something much more deliberate. He removed people who needed removing. He established clean structures around legitimate businesses he'd been running in parallel for years. He did it methodically, because methodology was what he had instead of the shortcuts that had previously been available to him. There was a morning in March when he came to the apartment. He didn't live there, had never suggested he should, had maintained a distance that was respectful and which Mara recognized as his version of keeping the space she'd asked for, and found her in the kitchen with Eli in the high chair and a mess of pureed something on the tray and a look on her face that was simultaneously frustrated and deeply fond. He stood in the kitchen doorway. She glanced up. "He's decided pureed peas are a personal insult," she said. Dante looked at his son. Eli looked at Dante with the focused, owning gaze he had developed over 3 months of becoming a person. He had, Mara thought, inherited his father's quality of attention, the way of looking at something like it was a room he had already assessed and found manageable. He picked up a fistful of pea puree from the tray and held it out in Dante's direction. "I think that's a peace offering," Mara said. Dante came into the kitchen and crouched down beside the high chair. He held out his hand. Eli deposited the pea puree into it with the tremendous satisfaction of someone who has solved a problem. Something crossed Dante's face that she had been watching for 3 months and still couldn't fully describe. The expression he got around Eli that had no equivalent in any other situation, that didn't look like any of the other things Dante Calder ever was. She had decided it was the look of someone being remade, gradually, by something smaller and entirely ungovernable, and that the remaking was neither comfortable nor something he would stop for anything. He looked up at her from his crouch beside the high chair. "He needs a bath," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "I can do that. If you need—" "I know you can." She looked at him. "I don't need a reason to let you, Dante. You're his father. You don't need to ask. He held her gaze. Then he nodded. She handed him the washcloth from the counter and went to make coffee while Dante lifted Eli from the high chair with the focused care of someone who had spent 3 months learning the specific weight and balance of one particular small person and had mastered it without making a performance of the mastery. She stood at the counter and listened to the sounds from the other room. Dante's low voice, Eli's commentary, the water running. She listened to those sounds and she made coffee, and she thought about a marble floor and the feel of it under her knees and the cold and the watching and the hands that had been steady. She had been surviving on that floor. She understood now that surviving was not the same as living, but it was also not a small thing. Surviving was where living started. You didn't get to the other side of something without going through it, and going through it required the particular stubbornness of someone who keeps their hand steady even when nothing else is. The coffee finished. She poured 2 cups. She took them to the doorway and leaned against the frame and watched Dante Calder sit on the bathroom floor with his son in the tub, negotiating with him about the washcloth the way you negotiate with someone who has complete sovereignty over whether any deal gets done. And she thought, this is what I left because I was afraid of losing it. She thought, I understand now why that was wrong. Not because the fear hadn't been real. It had been real. It was still real, if she was honest, in the way that real fears don't disappear when you look at them but become something you know the shape of. She knew the shape of it now. She knew what loving someone when the outcome wasn't guaranteed felt like from the inside, and she knew that the alternative, the constructed safety, the chosen distance, the marriage to a careful stranger, was not a smaller risk. It was the same risk in different clothes. She set one coffee on the edge of the sink within Dante's reach. He looked up. She went back to the kitchen. She heard him say thank you to the room, which was something she'd noticed he'd started doing, saying things to the space she'd just left, things he might not have said while she was still standing there. She had noticed this and said nothing about it and intended to continue saying nothing about it, because some things you let be what they were. There was an afternoon in April when she went back to the Caldwell Center. She had not planned to. She had been in the neighborhood for a meeting with Paula about the divorce proceedings, and afterward she had found herself standing on the street outside the shopping complex with no particular plan and the particular restlessness of someone who has been consciously avoiding a thing for long enough that the avoidance has become its own kind of weight. She went in. The marble floors were the same, the smell, that specific luxury retail smell, the flowers and the climate control and the faint expensive perfume of it, was the same. She walked to the east corridor and stood outside the Alara boutique and looked at the display stands inside through the glass. A different arrangement now, different scarves, the same marble. She stood there for a while. She thought about the woman in the white fur coat and the specific quality of that look. The one that said, you are furniture, you are function, you are the building's problem to solve. She had carried that look for a long time. She had carried a lot of weight that belonged to other people's contempt. And for a long time she had called that weight her own. She thought about Dante crouching down beside her on that floor. She thought about how she had known his hands. A woman pushing a stroller stopped beside her, looking at the window display with the mild interest of someone passing time. She had a baby in the stroller, slightly older than Eli, maybe 5 months, with the wide-eyed look of someone who had recently discovered that the world was an extremely interesting place. The woman glanced at Mara. The scarves in there are genuinely gorgeous, she said. Way out of my price range, but gorgeous. Mara looked at the display, at the silk, the color, the careful arrangement. Yeah, she said, they are. The woman laughed a little and moved on. Mara stood there another minute, then she went inside. She didn't buy anything. She wasn't there to buy anything. She walked through the boutique with the ease of someone who had been invited, which she had. The salesgirl nearest the entrance greeted her with the particular warmth of a retail professional who has identified a person who might have money. She said hello back without performance, without armor, without the specific smallness that had lived in her body the last time she'd been in this room. She touched one of the scarves. It was as soft as it looked. She thought about Eli's hand closing around Dante's finger. The reflex. The uncomplicated, total trust of someone who has not yet learned to calculate whether a thing is safe before reaching for it. She set the scarf back on the display. She walked out. Dante was waiting at the building's main entrance. She hadn't told him she was coming here. She hadn't told anyone. She stared at him for a second. How did you know I was here? She asked. I didn't. He had his hands in his pockets and the particular mild expression of a man who has given up performing anything. I had a meeting in this building. We were walking out at the same time. She looked at him. That's the truth, he said. I know, she said. That's what's funny about it. They stood on the sidewalk outside the Caldwell Center in the April light, which was a different light from October, warmer, with the particular quality of a city remembering what warmth felt like after a long time of cold. He looked at her. She looked at him. Are you ready? He asked. She thought about all the things that question could mean. She thought about what she had carried into this building 6 months ago, on her knees on that floor, with steady hands. She thought about what she was carrying now. Different weight, different kind, the kind that was still difficult, but was hers and was honest. I've been ready, she said. I was just finding my way to the right door. She took his hand. Not dramatically. Not the way it happens in stories that want you to feel the moment as a conclusion, as a bow on a thing. Just the ordinary, daily, human act of two people who had survived something walking out into the world that remained, choosing to do it side by side. He held on. And the city went on around them, indifferent and full of its own urgency, the way cities are, not caring who had knelt on its floors or slept in its warehouses or stood in its nursery doorways in the dark, making decisions they would spend years reckoning with. The city just continued as it always did, as all of it always did. Only the people changed. Only the people, slowly, with effort and without guarantees, had the option of choosing something different from what they'd been handed. Mara Ellison had been handed a marble floor and a watching crowd and a yellow cleaning uniform and the specific silence of people who had decided she wasn't worth the inconvenience of helping. She had taken all of that and she had kept her hand steady and she had waited for the moment to be over. The moment was over. What came next was hers.